Spanish did you both know before you moved?
Generally speaking, language is not a barrier, I would say, but
Any significant differences when it comes to buying a property in the US versus buying a property in Spain?
well, the big one is
Do pay the Spanish government a 10 to 12% tax on top of the price of the property.
I'm just gonna have to pay taxes on everything I own. I know you didn't just fly out. Can you tell us a bit more about how you ended up buying your property? And
the first property we visited was the one we ended up buying because we fell instantly in love with it.
that you needed to take off your list to get a health insurance?
Yeah, health insurance is obviously very important, and so you actually have to know in your health insurance where you pay yourself out of pocket. On average, I would say.
If you're feeling comfortable, and do you feel like you've made the right decision so far? What is the specific route that you guys took? So, is there any piece of advice you wish you had heard before moving to Spain? You know, the process of applying to move and become a permanent resident in Spain. So hi everyone, and welcome back to Coming to Spain. So I'm Laetitia, and here we talk about the real story and the challenges that expats face when moving to Spain, so you can get the good and the bad. And in today's episode, I'm very excited because we're covering 3 topics that I keep hearing about. So first one being taxes, second one health insurance, and then the last one buying a property in Spain. So those are all tricky topics, but hopefully my guests today are going to be able to share their experience and expertise, because you know when you move to a new country you become a bit of an expert, so they will be sharing all of it with you guys today, and they would share also some of the pitfalls that they face so that you guys don't have to face similar mistakes. So to help us break it down, I'm joined by Gary and Philippe. And they recently moved to Barcelona, actually. They are not far from me, and they were living in California for years, and they have a lot of lessons that they can teach us about their move. So I'm very excited to have you, Gary and Philippe, so thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Hello.
Brilliant. So, well, let's get started, okay? So my first question is around, moving to a new country. It's a huge decision, let alone a country where the language is different. You are far away from friends and family. And I wanted to hear, because you were living in California, and especially in Sonoma, and I know it's such a beautiful part of California. So I'd love to know what made you decide to move to Barcelona.
Well, for us, our personal situation is that we retired. In a nutshell, we retired last year, and we knew that we were not going to, we didn't want to stay where we were. So it was actually time to transition to another place. We were living in a fairly semi-rural environment, let's say, and we were interested in maybe in a more urban type of lifestyle. So the decision to move to Spain and Barcelona specifically didn't happen overnight. Clearly, this was a process. We traveled to Spain many times over the years, especially to Barcelona, and we've really grown more and more fond of this city and Spain in general. And so when the time came to make a decision, decide where we would like to live and go, it was an easy choice for us. It was definitely Barcelona, Spain.
Amazing. And actually, I know you just said it was an easy choice. So why? What is it that made you feel like Barcelona specifically could be home to you guys?
Oh, I was just going to add that we had a couple of criteria. We wanted to be near the sea. We wanted to be near a major international airport because we wanted to be able to travel in Europe. And of course, we had been to Spain many times, so Barcelona really fit the bill. in terms of those criteria.
And actually, before I get back, sorry, to my last question, I think I should take a step back, because you've mentioned, Philippe, that both of you are retired. I mean, you are now retired, but I think it would be interesting for the audience to hear, because, you know, moving to a new country is a big step, but I know, Philippe, for you particularly, it wasn't the first time, right?
Correct. Yeah, I had moved from France, where I'm from originally, to the US 35 years ago. So it wasn't my first intercontinental move. So it, something I had experienced before. Plus, for me, being from France, going back to Europe actually feels pretty natural. But I can see how someone who has always lived in the US, Europe would feel maybe, maybe out of reach, or it would be intimidating for them to make the move.
For sure. And what about you, Gary? I mean, Philippe had moved from France to the US, but what about you? Was it your first time moving to a new country?
First time, yes. I grew up in the States and have only lived in the States, but visited many times throughout Europe, and certainly France and Spain are familiar to me. But living here is different for sure, and in a good way.
In a good way.
Yes, yes.
And so I'd like to kind of hear more about this, because it links back to my own question of like, what made you feel like Barcelona was home, and how is it different? So for people who are like dreaming about moving to Barcelona, and they want to hear from someone who actually, who are living there, like what would you say are the big differences between Barcelona and maybe California or the US in general?
Well, for us, we were seeking a more urban environment. We wanted to live in a big city. But the thing about Barcelona is that even though it's relatively small, it really has become a world city with lots of international people there. So this international feel was very appealing to us. Then it's a very lively city, lots of resources, services, and where people, to us at least, very kind, civil. I would say, if I had to summarize in one word, the vibe I feel in Barcelona is harmony, right? Low anxiety, live and let live, and people seem happy. So that actually does matter to live in such an environment. And then there is Spain in general, right? Spain is really a great country. I mean, it really has become a major engine in the European Union. It has a lot going for it. And then, personally, I have a special connection with the Spaniards. I really like the Spaniards.
And I mean, it's interesting because you said, live and let live, and that if you had to summarize it in one word is like harmony. But actually from the outside, maybe people listening to us, what they've heard about is there's been a lot of bad press around Spain and about places like Barcelona, around how perhaps, people from outside are not as welcome, that maybe people, I've seen stories maybe years ago around, people not wanting tourists or so-called expats. So that hasn't been your feeling, like you haven't felt that tension or felt like you were not welcome as expats and Americans?
Very, very good question, right? But
in the first 9 months, not at all.
Not at all.
I feel like that's not been our experience in our neighborhood or in the city. I think this is a product of media to some degree. I think there's probably truth to those reports. But I think living near San Francisco, there's also been reports of San Francisco being kind of in a doom loop, or that the city is really going downhill. And when you visit the city, that's just simply not true for the most part. So for our experience here, that's not been true at all. It's been very welcoming.
And same, I mean, if that's not too personal, like as a same-sex couple, like did you feel like you were treated differently, or did you feel any sort of antagonism or around you guys being around?
Not at all.
Zero.
Not at all. We feel very, very comfortable here. We feel very welcome. People have been extremely nice wherever you go. There's really no problem. No, in every interaction we have on a daily basis, we've never felt a hint of anxiety or rejection. So we feel really good about this living here.
Yeah.
Amazing. And I'm glad that we can also share that side of, because I also, as a black woman also, when I initially moved to Spain, I was a bit, especially in Barcelona, I was told, I had heard a lot of things around, like maybe racism and different stories, but then actually, like in my day to day, I've had a very similar experience as yours. So it really matches up with what I see on an everyday, where people are actually really open, and you just feel good. It's a really good place to live. And you touched on the fact that you've been in Spain for 9 months, right? So Philippe, you just mentioned, so it's been 9 months, so it's still early stage, but I mean, I think it's good enough to give you a sense of if you're feeling comfortable, if you feel like you've made the right decision. Do you feel like you've made the right decision so far?
Yes.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, Barcelona really has checked all the boxes and has delivered so far. We kind of knew, but of course, now we know for sure, we have proof that this is the right place for us. I would add that, Barcelona is probably different from the rest of Catalonia, right? And so, I'm not sure how we would be outside of Barcelona, but Barcelona itself being so international, I mean, clearly you cannot be this international and, racist or, xenophobic at the same time. It doesn't add up.
I mean, yeah, I agree. So I'm excited. Hopefully now we got people excited around Barcelona, but now let's take a step back and kind of walk people through the step to get there, because it's not all easy, and I mean there can be some complexity. I mean, when it comes to, there's a few things that we're going to discuss, I touched on at the beginning, so healthcare, taxes, and in your case you wanted to acquire a property in Barcelona. So we'll start with healthcare, because I think it's really relevant, especially for people looking to retire in Spain, because it's a key requirement. I mean, it's a key box that you've got to check. You need to get a health insurance. There's some specificities. So if you could walk us through a bit of like your journey, because I know it hasn't been the easiest. I mean, there's been a bit of along the way, like some difficulties, let's put it that way, when it came to finding a provider that could cover you. So maybe if you could start with, what were the requirements that you needed to take off your list to get a health insurance, and what were some of the difficulties that you faced regarding age and maybe some coverage requirements?
Well, it's important to know that whatever avenue you choose, whatever visa you're trying to get, you will be asked to show proof of health insurance, right? So that's number one. Number two, for older people who are retired, health insurance is obviously very important. And so you actually have to know that there are some limitations, potential limitations, as we found out. For example, existence or pre-existing conditions, the exclusion period, which is called here periodo de carencia, for example. So these are things to know when you apply for health insurance. So even though overall the cost of owning a health insurance is definitely much lower than in the US, know that there might be some limitations to work out. And so you need to do your homework and get ahead of that pretty early in your process, because obviously it's a critical piece of your moving to Spain.
Initially, we found out about a policy through our bank. So we acquired a bank account here in Barcelona, and our bank offered us a health plan. And unfortunately, we were rejected initially from that plan, possibly from sharing a little bit too much detailed information about our health, which was nothing dramatic. We ended up going through a broker here in Barcelona who gave us an option of different plans, and we ended up selecting a plan that worked out for us through that avenue.
And you just briefly said about, and sorry, Philippe, maybe let me finish up first.
No. I mean, there are health insurance exchange platforms. The one we know and we use is called eSalud. And basically, you have a list of all the plans available, and you can sort through that as a first step.
Amazing.
But as a general rule, the exclusion period and the pre-existing conditions are pretty much there across the board.
And I know that you guys mentioned, I mean, it's quite interesting that health insurance in Spain was cheaper compared to the US. So is there like a significant difference when it comes to prices?
Yes, enormous.
Enormous difference.
Yes. I mean, I think for the average retired American who is not yet in Medicare age. Just as a background, we U.S. Citizens become Medicare eligible at 65. That's the health insurance for older adults in the U.S. And so there is this period for some of us who retire earlier than 65. So between that retirement age and age 65, there is kind of a lull in your health insurance where you basically are going to have to pay yourself out of pocket for the premiums, right? And those premiums can really add up. And probably on average, I would say $2,000 per person per month. So that's a big chunk of money at the end of the year. Yeah. So and obviously Medicare may not apply if you decide to move to Spain permanently, but it's definitely a consideration. So yes, the cost of the monthly premiums here are much lower.
And it's one of the reasons we were able to consider retiring earlier, and Spain or Europe in general was a reason that we could financially afford to do so because of the healthcare costs. Whereas in the U.S., it would have been unfeasible to do so in the U.S. and stay in the U.S. paying those prices.
So would it be a big statement to say that had you not moved to Barcelona, you would still be working in the U.S. and would not have been able to retire, would still have to work for a couple of more years?
I think that's probably true in our case. That's probably true.
Well, the region we come from, right, California, North Bay, the cost of living is pretty high. So all in all, our cost of living here is much lower, no doubt, right?
Less than half.
Yeah, not so much in terms of health insurance premiums, but just the cost of living in general. So which makes retiring here much more affordable.
Okay, so let's touch on this, on cost of living. Tell me a bit, when you're mentioning of how your cost of living is significantly lower here, what were the biggest surprises? Like, what are the things here that you can afford that that seeming in the US perhaps it would have been like, well, triple the price? Like, what are like some like things that we could, because I was going to talk about property, but first let's talk about day-to-day items of things that you think are a lot cheaper in Spain or in Barcelona right now in your example.
The obvious is food. So grocery shopping and restaurants, although not as cheap as we remembered Spain being in years past. It's definitely compared to the San Francisco Bay Area. Going out for a mid-priced meal is probably around half the price that we're used to paying, and same for grocery store prices. Quite inexpensive compared to where we came from.
We enjoy eating out, right? So it's definitely a lot of cost saving compared to where we used to live.
Quality also, no? From a quality standpoint, perhaps it's better.
The quality of food? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think in general that is true. Although in Northern California, the Californians pride themselves on fresh food. But I think if you look at it across the board in the U.S., definitely a much healthier selection of food here in Barcelona.
Yeah, and then besides, restaurants, groceries, I think just utilities. Utilities, big one too, right? It's much less to the electricity bill, energy bill, and
Alarm
other
system.
regular utilities. Property taxes, we'll probably come back to that when it comes to purchasing a property here. But overall, the running cost, once you've acquired property and you've kind of settled, the running costs of living here are much lower than in the US.
Right, and I think it's a good segue to property actually, because you guys had mentioned to me that one of your plans was always to come and buy a property in Barcelona, which I know you did, so congratulations, because it's a big endeavor. But I know you didn't just fly out like to come, you just came and then just bought the property. I know there was a lot of scouting trips and a lot of back and forth. Can you tell us a bit more about how you ended up buying your property and the steps that it took to get?
Yeah, I mean, once we had established that Barcelona was our destination, we made a first trip, and that's where we wanted to retire. We made our first trip and established a connection with a realtor, and started looking for property. We were very lucky in that literally the first property we visited was the one we ended up buying, because we fell instantly in love with it. So it really made our work much easier that way.
We fell in love with the property and the neighborhood and the street that it was on. So it was kind of a package. And we'd come out in May just to look at neighborhoods and compare prices between neighborhoods. And this property that we've bought, that we're currently sitting in, was being remodeled. And so we got to tour it before it was finally done, but we agreed that if it was still available, we'd come out in May initially for that first scouting trip. And we agreed that when we came back in September, if it was still on the market, that it would probably be our top choice. And indeed, we came back in September and it had not sold. It was done. So we got to see it finished. We still looked at other properties in September just to make sure we weren't missing something, that maybe there was a better deal or a better neighborhood or a better apartment for us. But we ended up making an offer on this apartment 3 or 4 months later, and it got accepted, and we closed on it a couple of months later.
Yeah, one of our main objectives was to to limit as much as possible the amount of money we were going to spend. And so one option would have been, to move here and rent first, and then give ourselves more time to look for property. But we decided against that because it was going to be an additional expense of money with more moving, right? First moving into the rental, then moving into the property we elected to buy. So ideally, we wanted to move into a place that we bought, and so that actually worked out.
I think we had also heard some horror stories about how difficult it is to rent in Barcelona, and just the challenge of dealing with a short to mid to long-term rental, depending on what we were going to be doing. We also have a dog that we flew over. And so for us, it was just less complicated to just buy a property that was our own and not have to deal with another layer of transitioning for another year or whatever it would take, and then buy. So it was just our decision to buy right away.
So then let me get the timeline right. So in May, you came, you saw the property, you liked it, but didn't buy it just yet. And then in September, this is when you came to settle, right? And this is when you got the property.
Right. We came in September to buy it. We flew back because Philippe was still working. And then we came back yet again in November to buy furniture and to do some initial kind of setup of the apartment before we moved into it.
Yeah, but we made our offer in September.
Yeah, no, we made the offer in September. We had the apartment when we came back in November.
And we closed basically in late October, so it took a little bit over a month to close.
Yeah.
Between the offer and the signing.
I mean, mean, I don't know if you had gone through the process of buying also in the US, and whether there were any significant differences when it comes to buying a property in the US versus buying a property in Spain.
Well, the big one is the realtor, or as a buyer, we found out that we didn't really need a realtor. We can do our own shopping and house hunting. There's a lot of websites out there available. We use Idealista, which I think is the most widespread website. We found out that it was pretty easy once we've identified a property to contact the agent, make an appointment, and visit the place. So you don't really need to have an agent to do that. You can do it on your own. I think the role of the realtor is more important for the seller. And one thing I think is important to add at this point of the conversation is that some realtors, if you are going to use a realtor, they may be tempted to charge you a commission as a buyer. And my understanding is that in Spain, actually, it is illegal for a realtor to charge the buyer. They are likely to charge the seller, but not the buyer. So it's just an aside that's important to know.
No, definitely, because I think that's a big thing where sometimes culturally speaking, maybe you come from the US with the US mindset where, I'm just going to do things the same way I did back home. And there might be some people also here in Spain that might take advantage of, knowing that maybe Americans are more prone or keen to get some extra support. So it's good to tell people that actually, honestly, and I agree, Idealista is the best place to go. You find a place, it's easy. You can even change it to English, and then you can easily get in touch with the agent. But before we talk about taxes a bit, I wanted to talk about. I just mentioned that you can change Idealista in English, but I wanted to ask you about. I mean, I know the answer, but I want to know about how much Spanish did you both know, so Gary and Philippe, before you moved here? Because I want to understand whether it's a pre-requirement, especially when it comes to making such a big move and also a massive purchase, because you bought a property. So did you speak Spanish before moving?
I did not. I had very little Spanish. I've been in school now for 6 months. So I go to school 5 days a week, a few blocks from our home here. And I'm up to a B1 level. Now I'm proud to say, so it's my main job right now is to try to improve my skills in the language. I would say though that maybe fortunately or unfortunately, it is very easy to speak English in many places here. Although I would say that Spanish is really required to do a lot of business. And that's where I rely on Philippe to get by. Now let me speak.
Yeah, I think knowing some Spanish is important, especially if you're going to transact overseas. I mean, from on the phone, especially. So your phone skills need to be pretty good. So you have to have some understanding of Spanish on the phone. So those transactions that you will end up doing right from abroad, from the US, require some Spanish skills. And yes. It is true that here in Barcelona specifically, a lot of people speak English, so that generally speaking, language is not a barrier, I would say, but there are definitely some specific areas that it does help to know Spanish. And, when you call for utilities or little things, the bank, you may actually connect with people who do not speak English, and you will be expected to understand what they're saying. So
it does come in, but I agree. I mean, I think you can come to Spain without speaking Spanish, but ultimately this is something that you should be moving to over as you settle. If you really want to experiment Spain, also I think understanding the language is so important, because you get so much closer to. I just think the experience is completely different. I think like sometimes because of what you said, it's so easy to rely on English, because at the end of the day it's your comfort zone. But yeah, speaking Spanish opens a new world. And from a very practical standpoint, day to day,
yes,
practical standpoint, I need to get this fixed. Like, internet is not working. You want to, I need a plumber.
Exactly, exactly. Little things every day, and in that requires a very specific vocabulary that you may not be using every day. So all that comes handy when you have some mastery of the language. But it doesn't have to be on a very high level to start with. That's the good news.
Definitely, because I think that's a big blocker. I think that's what happened with people. It's like, I don't speak Spanish, or I just can't go to Spain. So I like what you said. I mean, it shouldn't. It's something that you can, you're eventually going to learn, but it shouldn't block you from moving to Spain.
Yeah.
And now I wanted to talk a bit more on the admin side, and especially you, Gary, because I mean, Philippe is a Frenchman, has the benefit of having, I think both passport. You have both the French and the American passport. I imagine the nationality. I imagine, but in your case, Gary, the process must have been a bit trickier. So I wanted to take a step back and look at the application, like the process of applying to move and become a permanent resident in Spain as American, and as an American, how has it been for you? And especially giving tips to all the Americans and non-Americans. I mean, non-European out there. What has
Yes.
been the
Yeah.
process for you?
Yeah, we started last September, actually, when we knew we were actually moving, because we had made an offer on an apartment, and I reached out to an attorney here in Barcelona, an immigration attorney. Actually, he's part of the same firm that we used for this, the purchase of our home. We had an attorney to the same firm, and our first question was whether or not we would need to work with anybody in France, since Philippe's a French citizen, in order for me to gain Spanish residency, EU residency. And we were told no, that Philippe would get his Spanish residency card, and then I would then use that to show Spain that I was married to an EU resident, right, who was registered here in Spain. Unfortunately, that turned out not to be true, so we lost several months in the process. We arrived in January. I think in February, Philippe got his residency card, and we reached out to our attorney and said, hey, Philippe's got his residency card. Are we ready to go with Spain? And his reaction was, now you need to register your marriage in France. And we were a bit taken aback and not very happy with that response. But we moved forward, and it's now been another 6 months. I had to get many records from the US to deliver to France, to register our marriage in France. That happened about a month ago now. So we're now going on a year, and I'm still waiting for my response from the Spanish government to our marriage being registered here in the EU. So hopefully in the next month or two, I'll have my Spanish residency card. But it's I would say quite a process. And honestly, because I go to school with a lot of individuals from the US, from England, from Turkey, from Russia, who are trying to get visas in various ways, digital nomad or student visas. I hear a lot of nightmare stories about attorneys here. I'll just say, and I think a second opinion is always warranted whenever looking at an immigration attorney. Making sure that you understand really what the process is up front can be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe a little bit of background, because our situation may not be a very common one, but yes, I am a EU citizen, so we elected this avenue, right, as the basis for to make our situation here legal. But also we got married in California, so that's why we had that extra step of having to register with France, which had to be a French consulate in California in order to do that. So that's what happened. That's what took so long, the registration with the French government.
And when you say we took that route, so the route that you took, is it like, because I know there's different type of ways of moving. So there's like the family reunification, there's like the non-lucrative visa. So what is the specific route that you guys took? So was for Gary in order for Gary to get the residency? I just wanted to get the term right.
Does it have a name?
I don't know the exact name of it, but it's basically spouse of an EU citizen. And we were told by our immigration attorney this was the more permanent, more lasting or durable visa for me to have. here, as opposed to we could have gone non-lucrative. At the time, we actually could have gone golden visa as well because it was still active. But after consulting, we were told that this was the best route for us since Philippe is an EU citizen. Yeah.
And speaking about getting more than one opinion, I know you talk about, lawyers giving initial recommendation that turns out to be incorrect.
Yes.
I know you had a similar situation with taxes when it came down to taxes. Could you tell us a bit more, first of all, as again, American citizen, like what are some of the kind of consideration that people should have when moving to, let's talk about Catalonia in your case, because I know there's differences between regions in Spain. So in terms of taxes, what do you know in terms of the main consideration to have? And if you could tell us also a bit about the story around some of the information you had initially been given and what it turned out to be.
Yeah, well, the general, some general guidelines here is that if you've lived more than 180 days in the tax year, in a year, you actually become a tax resident in Spain, meaning you become tax liable. So you will be expected to pay taxes. There is a misconception that you would be double taxed, what's called the double taxation, but that is actually not true. There is a special agreement between Spain and the US, so that's very important for people to know that when it comes to taxes. You will basically end up filing twice and probably sequentially, first with the Spanish government and then with the US when you file taxes. And obviously, you would need to hire a tax attorney to do that, to take you through the process. So little things we found out was actually for Gary, he had a pension from the county. And one thing we found out that was not made clear to us by attorneys at the beginning was that pension from a government organization in the US is not taxable in Spain. So that's one piece of good news. We found that out after some serious exploration. And then another piece that is important to know is that if your wealth, you will be taxed on your wealth, your worldwide wealth, by the Spanish government. But actually, that is not as scary as it sounds when you actually do the math and how much you will actually have to pay in terms of taxes on your wealth. Having said that, yes, Catalonia is one of the regions that charge the highest percentage in terms of wealth tax. But again, when you do the math, it actually doesn't come too much. So just want to reassure people who are viewing this video, because it really scared me for quite a while until I finally got to talk with an attorney and I did the math with him on paper to have an idea of how much to expect.
And to be clear, it wasn't a big deal for us. It might be for someone else, but from our perspective, it wasn't a large enough amount for us to worry about.
No, I understand. Yeah, because it's and actually, so it's good what you said, Philippe, because I also thought that pension was charged as income tax in Spain. So yeah, I had no idea. So I think there's a lot of things that you read online. And then that can block you for years and thinking, oh my God, I'm just gonna have to pay taxes on everything I own. But again, as you both said, like depending on the amount, it could be, once you do the math, it could work out for you. So
yeah.
So I think that's great. And well, we're coming to the end. We've covered a few things, but I really want to give you the opportunity now in this last bit when I really want you to kind of give advice to people who are looking to move to Spain. Is there any piece of advice you wish you had heard before moving to Spain, or is there any resources that has helped you a lot, that saved you time, that now you can share with the world for everybody that you can pass on and to help make the next person's move to Spain easier?
Can I back up just for one minute on purchasing a property in regards to taxes? Because I think it is a tip that we didn't know literally until we were buying, which is that at the point of purchase, you do pay the Spanish government a 10 to 12% tax on top of the price of the property, which is a pretty big deal. And I think if we had known that budgetarily, we may have looked at it differently. I think we still would have bought this property because we loved it, but it was a bit of a shock when we realized that you pay up front on top of the price of the property another 10 to 12%. And so that's a tip that I think if we had known when we were first looking, it would have helped us budgetarily think differently.
Yeah, there is this maybe misconceptions I've heard here and there that, property taxes are low, right? But what people don't know is that you actually pay upfront your property taxes at signing when you close for your property. And it is 10%. So you have to factor that in your budget, right? That you're going to be expected to pay whatever you put down, whether you get a mortgage or not. That's, independent of that, you will also have to pay 10%, which is in terms of property taxes, and that will be due at signing.
Yeah, that's definitely a big one, and it should be told.
Yeah.
It should be known. And I know you guys, maybe my last closing piece, I know you guys mentioned that you had a dog, that you moved to Spain with
Yes.
a dog. And I know a lot of people I speak to are planning on coming to Spain. Is there any tip here on that one? Anything that anything that you could share? Difficulties of ways of ways of making it easier for any, or it's been an easy ride for you?
Yeah, it wasn't easy, I will say, because they're like our babies, these dogs, and so we used a travel person from the Bay Area to help us coordinate the paperwork that Spain requires, and the veterinary paperwork as well. And so we ended up flying our dog over separately after we arrived. But it was a stressful process, to be honest. And we wouldn't do it any other way now. But I know there are people who do the USDA paperwork on their own. I think it's totally possible to do it on your own. We used someone to help us navigate that process because we were doing so many things at the time. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you can. The bottom line is that depending on the weight and the size of your dog, right, generally you won't be allowed to fly with your dog overseas. So in our case, the dog flew independently on a separate flight from us in the cargo hold, but under, proper conditions.
Yeah.
And he actually ended up doing very well. But we were a little anxious about that because it was a long flight with a layover.
Amazing, great, thank you. And I think this is super interesting. But one thing I really wanted to also touch on is some of the more maybe negative side of Spain, because we spoke a lot about how Barcelona is a great place, but also I know that culturally speaking, and I know that there can be a big cultural shock here, especially for Americans when it comes to, there's different things that can be very different here. So I would love for you to also provide maybe your experience and any advice for someone coming, to move here, and whether they need to be more open-minded of how they should kind of address this cultural shock.
Yeah, I think coming from the US, it's a very service-oriented culture where we're used to businesses and service providers being very responsive whenever you reach out for a request for something. And that's just simply not been our experience here in Spain, nor the experience of friends and colleagues that we have here. So it can take 2 or 3 times to reach out to someone and remind them that you're still waiting for them to respond to you. They may not be as timely as we're used to in the US when an appointment is scheduled. And my recommendation is just take a deep breath. It's rarely a malicious response. It's generally a cultural response. And it takes time to adjust to the fact that it takes time for people to respond to you here. I don't know if you would add anything.
Yeah, no, I think it's not different, not the same level of service, right? And just like Gary said, probably people are a little less responsive. So be patient. It may take a while to get your answer. You may have to make your request twice or three times before you get your answer. So be patient.
And don't be aggressive.
Don't be aggressive, but
be nice.
That's the thing, is that things do happen, and it does work. At the end of the day, it does work out. I mean, Spain is a very high functioning society, so with lots of progress being made all the time. So things do happen. It's just at a different pace. So be aware of that. The other thing that's very cultural in Spain, and I don't want to bear too much on that because I don't want to send the wrong message, but there is a little bit of just watch for those scams. You can be scammed if you're not careful, especially as a foreigner. So be on the lookout for that. Generally, it's my understanding is that there is some history about that scamming that goes back several centuries. In Spain, in the 17th century, that actually was a business to do that. So it's in the culture. So just be aware of that. Just be on the lookout for scams.
Have you guys had any negative experience when it comes to scam yourself?
Small one, a phone call, pretending to be the bank.
Wow.
And that my account had been hacked, so compromised, and it wasn't true. I actually picked up on the scam right away. I told the person on the phone, "Oh, this is an estafa," and and they hung up right away. And it turned out to be okay. Nothing happened. There was no movement on our bank account, but just be aware.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Philippe and Gary. Thank you. It was a great time. I've learned a lot from you guys, and I'm excited for everyone to hear your story. So thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.